Hello, everybody. We're going to give just a couple more minutes for folks to log on. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Angela Barger. I am the Environmental Stewardship Initiative Program Manager. I want to welcome you to the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality's Environmental Stewardship Initiative ISO 50001 overview webinar. Over the next couple of days, you're going to hear from myself, from Marsha Alacco, our section chief of the Environmental Assistance section of the Division of Environmental Assistance and Customer Service, and Don Burke, who is our ESI Membership and Outreach Coordinator. The three of us are the staff that routinely provide environmental management system training and assist members with EMS implementation. But many of our members lately have expressed an interest in the energy management system. So we've decided to put together this overview to assist in their efforts. We also need to be sure we thank our partners at the Land of Sky Regional Council and the Waste Reduction Partners, which is a 20-year-old pollution prevention program that provides customized on-site technical assistance, including energy audits and assistance. And so if at the end of this session, you would like to have them come out and kind of help you do a quick walkthrough of your facility and give you some ideas of low cost, no cost kinds of ideas for your energy, then we'd love to connect you with them to do that. Just a few housekeeping items before we dig into today's topic. If you're having audio issues, you probably can't hear me anyway. But if you're using the audio through your computer, you can switch to your telephone. Just go to that audio tab in the webinar control box and click the phone. And a phone number and a code will be shown there. And that same phone number and code are also in the reminder emails that you've received from GoToWebinar. We are recording today's session, and we'll send you a link to where we post it on our website to all registered attendees. So just in case you can't make all of today or even tomorrow's session, you will have access to that to do some catching up. And then we do have a couple of items in the handout section. One of those is the PDF of all the slides that we'll be using today and tomorrow. And the other is a tool for performing a gap analysis. It's an Excel spreadsheet that can kind of give you a visual representation of where you stand as you go through and answer the questions within that spreadsheet. So it's similar to one that we have given out for 14,001 if you've received that from our program in the past. This one was put together by one of our summer interns. So if you find any issues with it, please let us know. We're happy to update it, but we thought it might be a useful tool for some of you guys. We currently have everybody muted in order to prevent feedback and eliminate unintended background noise. So therefore, we're asking that you submit questions using the question function on the control panel. If you need to add clarification to a question, you can use the hand raising functionality. So if you click on the attendee menu, you should see your name, and next to it should be a little hand symbol. If you click on that, it sends us a notice that you'd like to speak, and we can unmute you and you can kind of clarify the question that you asked. So today we're going to go through just kind of briefly what energy management systems are. We're going to talk a little bit about the ESI program itself in case you're not familiar with us. And then we'll go through the energy management system and ISO 50001 overview. And then we'll have a Q&A at the end. The overview itself is going to take today and tomorrow afternoon. It's just a lot to go through. The nice thing about this ISO 50001 standard is that it ties in with ISO 14001. So if you already have an environmental management system, then the energy management system should just be a few additional things into that. There are some specific items to energy management that are not included in the environmental general management system. So we'll try and note those as we go through, but a lot of the stuff is just a matter of incorporating energy into your environmental system. So that should be helpful for those of you that already have that system. So to learn a little bit more about our audience, we do have a few poll questions for you. So let me launch this first one. Let's see, there we go. You should be seeing that now. The first one is, how would you describe your organization? So we're just trying to get an idea of whether you're industrial or government or commercial, kind of where our folks are kind of sitting today. So it looks like it's a mix, about 50-50 industrial and government. I'm gonna close that. And then our next poll is, why did you choose to take the class today? In other words, kind of what are you trying to get out of today? Is it just for general knowledge? Are you planning to put a system in place? Maybe you already have an ISO 50001 system at your facility, but you're new to it. All right. So we've got about a quarter of you wanting general knowledge, about half wanting that you're considering putting an energy management system in place, and then the other quarter is a new staff coming into a system that already exists. Great, thank you. Close that one. And then our last one, just to kind of get to know you a little better, is, does your organization currently have a formal energy management system? I'm going to have to catch myself multiple times a day because we're so used to teaching the environmental piece. Okay, well, that was evenly split across all 4 answers. That's great. Okay, great, wonderful. Okay, so let me close that and we'll move on. So let's talk about what the ESI is. We started about 20 years ago with 20 facilities, and we've increased that to about 96 members and 199 facilities across the state of North Carolina. We began by only allowing entities that were permitted by DEQ, but we have relaxed that so that any organization can join whether they are permitted or not, as long as they're willing to set and report on their environmental goals. This allows entities that have improved their performance through P2 and other means to participate. For example, a facility that has eliminated all of their permits by reducing their impact. But it also allows those smaller entities that never had permits in the first place, but are trying to improve their environmental footprint that's not necessarily permitted, to be a part of us as well and to learn from others in our program. We have a wide variety of members, including small business, agribusiness, large industrial, service providers, federal and state operators, local municipalities. So we have a huge range of industrial categories, which is wonderful because that cross-pollination of ideas is what our program is really all about. We are free and a voluntary recognition and leadership program. And while we are operated from the Department of Environmental Quality, we are in a non-regulatory division. So we're all about providing that assistance and networking. ESI membership has 3 levels. That starts with our partner level. Basically here we're looking at having you establish those 2 measurable goals or setting a goal to implement an environmental management system like ISO 14001. Everybody has to report to us annually in order to remain in good standing. But really the low bar here is to not be under criminal indictment or conviction for an environmental issue. Our Rising Stewards, which is our middle level, that came in 2004, so the program started in 2002. So a couple of years later, we realized the need for a level of the program to be between our just getting started and our superstars of the program, our stewards. So the Rising Stewards are those who have that mature environmental management system in place. They commit to go beyond compliance, and they also set long-term measurable environmental goals. And then finally, our stewards, again, this is the highest level of the program. They set aggressive environmental goals, integrate their environmental management system into their core business functions, communicate with their local community on their environmental progress, and then they also agree to mentor others in the ESI program and even beyond that. Our staff, which consists of the 3 folks that you'll be hearing from today and tomorrow, as well as some coaches that are part of our division that have other main functions, but also provide coaching for our members. We help with technical and compliance assistance. We try to tailor assistance to members' goals and needs, so connecting you with the right resources or providing those resources ourselves. One of our big things is that environmental management system assistance and education on that. We have a module series on those. As far as the 50,000, this energy management goes, this is the only course that we plan to currently provide, but we'll give you some resources at the end to help you if you want to move forward with it. Our expertise is not in energy management series, it's in environmental management series. So, you know, we may also have to get back with you on some of the questions, but we do want to give you this kind of high level overview. What you can see here is, remember I said all of our members have to report to us on their progress towards their goals, and this is from the 2019 environmental report that they gave us. I'm currently working on the data for the 2020, so hopefully we'll be able to update these numbers too. But you can soon. But you can see, you know, just from the folks that have reported to us that close to 200 sites, the huge efforts that have been made throughout the state, including this about 15 members total reported on cost savings, because a lot of them consider it proprietary. And just out of those 15, they saved almost, well, over $11 million from energy projects, or environmental projects. And a lot of those were energy or water related. So that was the high level who we are. You know, if you're interested in learning more about us, just shoot us an email, let us know. At the end, there will be a survey that you can answer for us. It helps us to improve programs, these webinars, as well as our programs specifically. So that will ask you if you would like more information as well. So if you do, just feel free to let us know there and we can get back in touch with you and talk about the ESI. So let's get into the meat of why you're here today, which is energy management systems. Management systems in general are a proven tool that is designed to help you manage your activities that are specific to whichever, industrial standard that we're talking about. So in this case, we're talking about energy. I would say the same thing about environmental management systems or quality management systems. It's all about giving you the framework that you need in order to make sure that you're managing all of the important pieces to continually improve your system. So what does the energy management system do? It gives you a systematic way of managing those that information and your efforts towards improving your energy footprint. It makes sure that your energy strategies are a priority within your system, not just quality related, but also environmental and everything else, particularly safety. Those are all huge important things at any facility. So we just want to make sure that each one of those is prioritized and make sure that nothing falls off the plate. So this is one way that you can do that by helping you manage the energy piece. It helps give you order and consistency to address your energy concerns by making sure that you have the resources needed for that. It helps you to assign responsibility and then also make sure that you evaluate what you're doing and make sure that those activities that you put in place are actually giving you the benefit that you are hoping for. And with all management systems, particularly ISO management systems, the whole point is to focus on continual improvement. So why might you implement an energy management system? Well, it helps you focus your organization's priorities and avoid that flavor of the month syndrome. So just because the facility down the street is working on an exchange of a specific item, maybe you don't have that item in your facility, but you feel like you need to change something out just because they're doing it. So this helps you figure out what's important at your facility and do those things that matter to you first. It helps you prioritize energy related goals and support their needs for resources and attention. It encourages understanding of energy performance and improvement and establishes that framework so that you can evaluate and reduce your energy demand. And then finally, it helps to identify the root causes of your energy related issues. You might want to implement the ENMS. You increase your energy efficiency. Therefore, you're also reducing cost and reducing your carbon footprint and greenhouse gas contributions. Those are two of the big reasons why a lot of folks are starting to move towards these energy management systems. And then other possible benefits that you would get is an increased plant productivity, product quality improvements, reducing your scrap, improving your worker comfort, increasing availability for floor space, and improve safety. So all of these things might come from energy projects that you're putting into place. So it'd be great side benefits for you. So what is ISO 50001? So I'm talking about energy management systems generally, it's just like talking about environmental management systems generally. There's lots of models out there, but the internationally recognized model is ISO 50001. It's an internationally accepted energy management system. It was developed by a non-governmental organization that represents over 100 countries. ANSI, or the American National Standards Institute, is the US representative on the ISO stage for the US. It's very widely adopted, it is auditable, and it is compatible with all those other ISO standards that we've already talked about, the quality standard, the environmental standard, the safety and health standard. And what we mean by that is, a lot of times they all require policy, they all require that you have context set and all of that. And so they've actually made sure that the framework of the way that they have put together the standard is the same for each one of them. So policy is the same number, and the language is very similar. So all you have to do is kind of do an integrated policy if that's how you choose to go about it. So in the annex of the ISO 50001 standard, you will find this little chart that talks about how the different pieces are interconnected. So first of all, you've got all of these policy, objective, energy targets, baselines, all of that, and it promotes, supports, and sustains your performance, your achievement of your other intended outcomes, which goes into your continual improvement. So it's all about that whole plan, do, check, act model of continual improvement. So, and that's what all management systems follow. This is also known as the Deming cycle. And we can relate that to the 50001 standard by looking at how they've got it broken down. So it's broken into different sections or elements. And so you've got one actually called planning, which is nice because, you know, that's your first in the plan, do, check, act cycle. So all of these fall under planning. So that's figuring out what your risks and opportunities are, what objectives you're going to set, what your energy is currently and what you're going to actually measure it against, and then how you're going to collect your data. In the do section, you have the support and operation functions of the standard. So that's your resources, your training, communication, documentation, and then your operational planning and control, design, procurement piece. Under check, you've got that performance evaluation. So that's where you're actually making those measurements and you're doing your internal audits and your management review. And then act, that is your non-conformance and corrective action and your continual improvement piece. And similar to the environmental management system, you also have these two framework pieces for context and leadership and commitment, where you're figuring out what your context is for your energy system. And then also figuring out, you know, what the leadership commitment is, what your energy policy is going to be, and, you know, who's doing what with those roles and authorities. All right. So all of that hopefully will lead you to continual improvement. That is the way the plan, do, check, act cycle is set up to be. All right, any questions on generally what an EMS is? And then we're going to go into the specifics of the ISO standard itself.
I'm not seeing any questions as of yet.
Okay. So I will be flipping slides, but Marcia is going to talk to you about context for a while. So I'm going to mute myself. So if we get to my point and I forget, somebody tell me to unmute me.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our first inaugural energy management system training. I peeked at the attendance list, so I see some familiar names on there. I also saw quite a few folks I haven't seen. I missed our overview of our EMS earlier this spring, and I think some of you attended that, so great. I'm just a new face. I've got some notes I'm going to use, and they're on my other screen, so rather than you guys seeing me do this, I'm going to turn off my camera just so you're not distracted by that. All right. So as Angela noted, the ENMS sets you up with that framework. Angela, if you'll hit the next slide, to put your energy goals and hopefully achieve them. So this is a high-level overview of clause number 4, which is known as the context of the organization. And thank you for Dawn for putting this in there, because it got me to look at the section a little differently. So in clause 4, the context of an organization, you have to identify the organizational context, you have to identify those interested parties, but both of those roll up and they're included in your scope when you develop it for your energy management system. And we'll talk about those pieces that go into both of those in just a minute. But the other place that your context and your interested parties is used, it's used in at that section 6 where you're doing the planning for your management system. And then it's also identified as something you want to look at when you do management reviews, whether those underlying pieces are changing and you need to take that change into account. All right, next slide. Okay, so if you haven't taken one of our trainings before, I just wanted to highlight that we've got some text that we changed the color of it. So anywhere on a slide where you see that shall in red, that's a shall that's in the associated standard. So that's something you must do. And in our ISO 50001, there are 92 shall statements. You will also see in other places, there's not one on the screen, but you'll see purple text. And that refers to somewhere where you're going to need documentation, whether that's a document or a record. And there are 18 places in 50001 where it's requiring some documentation from you. So those of you familiar with 14,000, those numbers are 80 shalls and 15 documentation. So this standard is a little more prescriptive than your environmental management system if you have one of those in place. And as Angela noted, the EMS is a framework to establish an energy policy, set your objectives and energy targets, and to develop and implement the action plans and processes needed to achieve your objectives or your goals and those energy targets. So the standard says the organization shall determine the external and internal issues that are relevant to its purpose and that affect its ability to achieve the intended outcomes of its energy management system and improve its energy performance. So for those of you who are familiar with the 14,000, you'll notice that there's something missing. So under 14,000, it requires you to take the environment into consideration, but for the energy standard, it doesn't. And we'll go into some different things that could be included both internally and externally. And you'll see some familiar terms there related to the environment, but it doesn't specifically spell that out in this standard. And from the annex, you know, as we go through the standard, we like to include things that are noted as keys to implementation. So in the annex for the context, it says that it's a high-level conceptual understanding of your external and internal issues that can affect both positively and negatively. And as Angela mentioned, one of our other slides, you're going to learn about risks and opportunities. So really, if it affects your organization positively, well, then that's an opportunity. Negatively, that's a risk. And that's one of the things that the standard is going to ask you to think about as you implement it and hopefully work towards that environmental energy performance and improving it along the way. Next slide. Okay, so this is just sort of a graphic to show you there are a lot of different things that could go into developing your context. You know, some of those, they could be regulatory requirements, technical innovations in the equipment you could use, market trends. As we're all aware, there are things that can come out of the blue and affect markets, could affect how your business is going to be run. For the context of your energy management system, it could also be affected by your customers, what they want, by your utility suppliers, and also what they're required to do regulatory or legislatively. And in a big way, the weather plays a big role in your energy management system. Next, Angela. Okay. So what are some of the examples that the annex gives about those external issues that could be included in your context? So it's issues that are related to those interested parties, and we're going to go over what an interested party is in just a minute. But that could be, existing national or sector objectives, requirements, or standards. So if you're in an industry sector, Right now, we're part of an EPA grant, and one of the groups that we're allowed to interact with is a suppliers partnership for automobile manufacturers. So they belong, or quite a few of the big automakers and their suppliers belong to this suppliers partnership, and they're working together to try and put some goals in place, decarbonize their processes, some of those sorts of things. There could be restrictions or limitations on energy supply or security, or cost, or even the availability or types of energy. So, we've heard from some of our members, if they're in a part of the state that's energy is supplied through a co-op, they may not have the ability right now to implement some of the more green energy initiatives that they would like because they're under that co-op. And another, as you've all probably heard, there is active movement in North Carolina legislature right now about putting forward a new energy bill, and that could significantly change the policy or the legislation and the regulations for organizations in North Carolina and the providers of their energy. And then the last two, we just had evidence of this in the last few days, right? We just had Tropical Storm Fred, who dumped massive amounts of rain in the western part of the state. So climate change, I think we've all seen, we've had wildfires out west. I've seen them over in Greece and Turkey, different parts of the world where you usually don't hear about it. That doesn't mean it doesn't happen, but they're becoming more frequent. Different weather patterns. I sat through a webinar last year where the state climate office was talking about, just the averages in the state, and they were saying not only is our daytime temperature increasing in the state, but also the nighttime temperature. And they noted something that I didn't realize was, when that nighttime temperature increases, that affects crops because they like cooler temperatures, and they need that cooler temperature during the nighttime to be successful. So a lot of different things are affecting climate change right now. And the last thing is weather, right? So if our days are warmer and our nights are warmer, you're going to have to spend more days, more energy cooling your facility, or if we get a cold snap, we're getting some really strange weather patterns. You may have a cold snap where you have to heat things for longer. So all that's going to go into your energy management system. Next, Angela. And then, of course, there's going to be issues internally to your organization that's going to affect how you implement your energy management system. So, what are your business's objectives and your strategy? And truly, we've seen the pandemic, that can change really quickly. Some businesses changed what they were doing to meet supplies. One of those was like hand sanitizer or face masks or, face shields. How you manage your assets within your facility. What financial resources do you have to put into implementing your EMS, whether that be labor or money. And then, where are you on your journey? Are you, new to putting an energy management system in? You've got a little maturity and you're starting to establish that culture at your organization where people are thinking about, what they do affects the energy usage. And are you part of an organization that has some sustainability goals? I mentioned before, decarbonizing. Is that something that you want to do? Do you want to switch over to more sustainable energy production if you can? Another big thing is contingency plans. Have you planned for if your energy gets interrupted, whether that's by something, weather related, or that's something that happens at your supplier? We're all familiar God, it seems like it was so long ago, when the Colonial Pipeline gas was shut down for a few days and we had panic buying. That conceivably could happen with the natural gas supply as well. You know, that's something that the legislature has brought up. So, you know, have you thought about all of the things that could happen that could interrupt your energy supply? And then those operational risks and liability considerations. So we're going to talk about, you know, identifying risks in a little bit. Next. Okay. So if you were listening and paying attention, there was no purple on that slide for organizational context. So how are you going to implement this part of the standard? So you'll need to decide internally how you're going to develop your context and how or if you're going to document that process. So you know, some folks, they may put a manual together, they may write an SOP. You know, some of the things that you're going to talk about in an energy management system, they may already be tongue-tied there, may already be in another planning document that you have, whether that's a strategic plan or a business continuity plan. And so you've already thought about it. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. You can just point to those things. And then another way we've had folks document context in the 14,001 standard was, you know, producing documentation through meeting minutes that you've had discussions about certain things. So remember, these management systems have those shalls, but you want to create that happy mix where you're not creating too much documentation. You're meeting the requirements of the standard, and you're also adding in what you think you need. But you know, sometimes when we're developing these systems, they can almost get too big. So just make sure you have that lens when you're looking at it. You know, is there something I've already done that I can use to point to that, so I don't have to create it again? And you're going to want to take into that big picture, you know, that strategic direction. Where are you going? And you know, what is it that we do, and how can this energy management system fit into it? Next. Okay, so the next section of clause 4 is talking about understanding the needs and expectations of your interested parties. So these are interested parties that are relevant to your energy performance and your energy management system. And the standard asks you to determine what the requirements of these interested parties are. And then you're going to look at those and you're going to identify which of those becomes a need and an expectation of your organization, and that you're going to decide to address through your energy management system. Next, Angela. Okay, so this is just a graphic to think about, you know, who could these interested parties be? If you're a corporation, you know, it could be shareholders or investors. It's definitely going to be your employees, because those are the folks that you're going to work with to make sure that your energy management system is put in place, and you're establishing that culture within them, your suppliers, your contractors, to make sure that your system is successful. And you're also going to your community, you know, your regulators, whether you have a requirement or I've lost my train of thought. Sorry, guys. So that also could be the legislators. You know, as I stated earlier, they are integral in creating and dismissing legislation that could affect your energy management system. Next, Angela. Okay, so the second part of understanding the needs and expectations of interested parties. So this one, if you've got an environmental management system, this is attuned to your compliance obligations. It's just that the energy management system doesn't call that. So it says that your organization shall ensure that it has access to the applicable legal and other requirements related to its energy efficiency, its energy use, and its energy consumption. So those are some new terms. And so they're defined in the standard in the front part. So if you're implementing the energy management system or any management system, you know, they're going to give you some definitions up front. So that's also another good area to look to besides the annex. So energy efficiency is defined as the ratio or other quantitative relationship between an output of performance, service, goods, commodities, or energy, and the input of energy, right? So it's the energy required over the energy that you consume. Your energy use is the application of energy. So that could, some examples would be you're applying energy to ventilate your building, or you're applying energy to light, to cool, or you're applying energy to store data. All of those things use energy. And then the final term, energy consumption. So that's the quantity of energy applied to obtain a required outcome. Let's see. So that's that first bullet. And then the standard says that the organization shall determine how these requirements apply to your energy efficiency, your energy use, and your energy consumption. And then you're going to ensure that these requirements are taken into account when you implement your EMS or ENMS. And then you're going to review at defined intervals your legal and your other requirements. So this is another place where the energy management system is a little different. In the environmental system, it says you have to create a list of legal and other requirements, which I know we've got folks in here, they know that's now called compliance obligations in the other standard, where in the energy standard, they still call it legal and other. So you're gonna have to decide how you're gonna do that review at defined intervals. Next. Right, so how are you going to implement it? So just like your context, you need to identify how you're going to identify those interested parties, how you're going to determine those needs, and if you're going to address them in your energy management system, how you'll ensure access to the requirements, and how you'll review and at what interval. So, you know, could that be, oops, my first bullet got moved up there into that sentence, got to fix it. So you could put that into a manual, or you could put an SOP, a list of requirements. I would think personally that would be the easiest way. So you create a list and then, you know, you look at that over time and you make sure it doesn't change. But again, when you're implementing these standards, you put in place what makes sense for you, your organization, and how you're going to use your management system. And then you need to maybe you could document the discussions about your list through meeting minutes, because the standard does not require any documentation in this part. All right, next, Angela. All right, so you've looked at your context, you've identified those interested parties and what their requirements are, either legal or other. You're going to use those two things to determine the scope of your environmental, there we go, of your energy management system. So the standard says organizations shall determine the boundaries and the applicability of your energy management system to establish its scope. And when you determine that, your scope, you shall consider those external and internal issues from your context and the requirements that you identified in your interested parties. So clarification from the annex. So there's two different terms they like to use, and you'll see it in multiple places. So if it says to take something into account, it means that it's necessary to think about the topic, but it cannot be excluded. So that's take into account, you cannot exclude. Whereas this section, it says consider. And so consider means it's necessary to think about it, but it can be excluded, right? So when you're determining your scope, you shall consider your context and your required, your requirements that you identify, but you can exclude some of those, right? So that's an out for you and your organization when you develop your scope. But when you develop your scope, you want to make sure that you have the authority and the control of the energy efficiency, the energy use, and those energy consumption within the scope and the boundaries, right? So you're going to want to exclude something if it's not something that you don't have control over. And you shall not exclude an energy type within the scope and the boundary. So let's say you're at a facility, you're an electricity user, you're a natural gas user, you're a propane user. So if you have all three of those energy types, all three have to be included in your scope, in your boundaries. You can't exclude something. The only way I could see that you could do that is if you don't have any control over it. You know, one of the things that we always like to look at, or triggers us to talk about this exclusion, is when we come up on a site and you've got some area that we probably know you don't control, like a cell phone tower or a substation. So a substation, that would be something that would be relevant to your energy management system. But if Duke Energy owns it, or a co-op owns it and you don't own it, then you can exclude that from your scope, because you don't have any control or authority upon what goes, what happens there. And then this is the first place where the standard does require you to have some documentation. So it says your energy management scope and boundaries shall be maintained as documented information. Next. All right. So just when you're considering the boundaries and applicability of your energy management, think about those range of products and services, different sites and activities, so energy, transportation may be something that you want to think about under your energy management system. But that may, you transport something from your site to another site. So is that other site, someone else's? Do you own it? Do you want to have a different mix of what the scope of your energy management system is versus what's in, let's say, if you were doing a quality management system or an environmental management system? Are those two going to be exactly alike, or are you going to have some differences? And then your scope can change, whether you have someone external you to that provides some of the things that might be included in your scope. Or something where you've got common support for a centralized function. So one of our members is on a site and they share the central steam plant, I think, Angela. So some of those centralized heating and cooling functions are shared, so that that's something that would have to be taken into consideration. And then just your regular processes, procedures, instructions, or any site-specific requirements. Next. Okay, so your scope can include, and I know we've got some folks on the line today, it can include your whole organization, or if you're doing a step function implementation, it can just be specific functions or organizational units within your organization that start with an energy management system, and your plan is to then include more and more and get to that whole organization. And it can also be functions that cross groups of organizations. So just for those of you that are going for certification or registration, just make sure that how you thought about that makes sense to someone that's coming in from the outside. So you don't have any of those questions. Just make it clear, so that that's an easy process when someone else comes to look at what you're doing. Okay, next. All right. And then the last section of that context of the organization is called energy management system. And this is like the easy way, for both the environmental and the energy, they put this overarching statement in. So, if an auditor comes in and they can't quite put their finger on it, they'll look to this general statement as an area where they can ding you if they think that you're missing something. So it says the organization shall establish, implement, maintain, and continually improve your energy management system, including the processes needed and their interactions, and continually improve the energy performance in accordance with the requirements of the ISO standard. So this one's very specific. It says that you shall continually improve your energy performance. And I think that's the expectation. They've put together a pretty good framework of the steps you need to review your energy use, set targets, implement things. So if you put the energy management system in place, you should continually improve your energy performance. And just remember, especially within a larger organization, what fits for another site may not fit for you. And that's one great thing about the energy management systems from ISO. They're prescriptive to a certain point, but it allows you to customize that to what you're doing. And I know that causes some heartache. Some folks, want, a little bit more spelled out, but as you implement these things, you're going to appreciate that you can tailor it to what your organization's needs are. Next. All right. So as I mentioned, it requires you to demonstrate that continual energy performance improvement. So that's defined as improvement in measurable results of your energy efficiency or your energy consumption related to your energy use when you compare it to your energy baseline. And Angela and Dawn are going to go through some of these other concepts as we go forward of how you establish, your energy baseline and how you, figure out the energy efficiency and your energy consumption. It doesn't contain any quantitative targets. So again, it's all about what makes sense for you, some organizations, the state itself has that, EO 80, and we've got targets, I think it's like 50% for certain things, reducing it by 2030. So it's really what makes sense for you. Some organizations have some very energy intensive processes. So for them, reducing 2 or 5% may be a big objective or goal for them, and that makes sense. Whereas, another organization, they can put a little bit of effort in and maybe get a larger reduction because they're not so energy intensive. And you're going to define what makes sense for you, but just remember, the whole process about continual improvement. So if you don't make it to your goal the first time, definitely it's not that, you're not doing a good job. There may be other things that are working against you. So that's one of the benefits. Next. All right. And this is just sort of a reminder, to lock in those energy improvements longer term. You have to reinforce those gains and behaviors as you go along. So that goes into that maturity piece. You have to set up those behaviors, get your employees, your contractors on board and helping you establishing the things that you need to do to improve. And this just spells out some of the different areas within the standard that are going to help you to do that. Energy reviews, we're going to go over operational controls, the design standard, looking at your procurement processes, implementing that monitoring and measurement, doing your audits, and the management review. Next, Angela. Okay. Dawn or Angela, do we have any questions at all about that context piece?
No questions at this time.
All righty. Well, we are just gonna continue on then. So we've finished that framework piece, that context, clause 4, and we've now moved on to clause 5, which is known as leadership and commitment. And as they change the management systems, they have implemented this new section for leadership and commitment. Partly because I think at all organizations, there was a little bit of a tendency to put a lot of the requirements on a small number of people. As we all know, if you don't have commitment from leadership in an organization, a lot of times things don't get accomplished. So the folks that developed the standards wanted to make sure that the top management or those folks that make the decision in an organization know that they have requirements for this energy management system. So the standard spells out, and it's actually 13 different things that it expects from top management as far as the energy management system. So top management has to demonstrate their leadership and commitment with respect to that continual improvement piece. That's what you want to get out of implementing this. By one, ensuring that the ENMS scope and boundaries are established. So that's pretty easy to do once you've completed it. They also want top management to ensure that the energy policy, that your objectives and energy targets that Angela will talk about later are established, are compatible with the strategic direction of the organization, right? It's that top management that's steering the ship, that is able to make those under them aware, if there's going to be changes or how that's going to affect the management systems that are in place. Top management has to ensure that your ENMS is integrated into the organization's business processes. And so the standard defines a business, so those activities that are at the core of the purpose of the organization's existence, right? So you're going to want to make sure that everyone who can touch a piece of your system is aware. Those that really have a role, as Dawn's going to discuss, they're competent in what they're going to do. So that's integrating it into your business. It also says that top management will ensure that the action plans that are developed are approved and they're implemented, right? So if you come up with these goals, if you don't develop the plan to accomplish that goal, then you're never going to get there, right? And you also have to measure it. Top management must ensure that the resources needed for the environmental energy management system are available, right? So resources is people, resources is time, resources is money, resources is sending folks to training, resources is buying equipment, all of those things. Because top management are the folks that control the purse, right? Either the top management at your facility, or if you're in a corporation, it's the top management at corporate. And then lastly, for this slide, about half of the requirements, top management must communicate the importance of effective energy management and of conforming to the energy management system's requirements. All right, next slide, Angela. Okay. And I was surprised how much space 13 things can take up on a slide. All right, so top management also must ensure that your energy management system achieves its intended outcomes, right? So that's part of that management review, reviewing what you achieved. What did you set as your goal? Was there a difference? Did you get there? Did you not get there? What needs to get changed? They must promote that continual improvement of your energy performance piece, right? So as you go through your audits, making sure that the folks that are responsible for fixing the different pieces that you identify as continual improvement are fixed. Ensuring the formation of an energy management team. So this is the unique one for the energy management system. For those familiar with ISO 14001, we used to have an environmental management rep. That's been taken out. But here in the energy one, they've kept that this energy management team is going to be responsible, and that top management has to establish it. So the energy management team is defined as person or persons with the responsibility and authority for effective implementation of an energy management system and for delivering energy performance improvement. So I would envision that the energy management team is going to be very important at your organization for making sure your ENMS is successfully developed and implemented. Top management has to direct and support persons that contribute to the effectiveness of the system and to your energy performance improvement, right? So that's that piece that top management can delegate down certain things, but they still have the accountability. So directing and then supporting folks to make sure that what you say you're going to do is going to get done. They also need to support other relevant management, what we like to refer to as middle management, to make sure that those managers demonstrate their leadership within the organization as it applies to the area over which they have responsibility. I mean, and with the environmental management system, that was some of the areas where we saw some needs improvement. So in an organization, if you got top management and the environmental folks and the other folks are supporting the system, they need that middle piece, whether the communications is coming from the bottom up or from the top down. Everybody needs to be on board to make this successful. Ensuring that the energy performance indicators are appropriately represent the energy performance, so making sure that you are tracking the right things. And then finally, ensuring that the processes that are established and implemented to identify and address changes affecting your energy management system and your energy performance within the scope and boundary of the management system. So that's a mouthful. Angela, next slide. Right, so as with energy management system, any management system, we got a lot of words that sound alike here. If your employees observe that your top management is asserting responsibility for energy management, that will greatly assist in the establishment of, a positive culture and hopefully set you up for success. And some of the ways that management does that can be different depending on where you are in the culture of your organization. So there was, as I mentioned, there was 13 things that top management is responsible for related to their commitment to make your energy management system a success. So again, there was a couple reds, shells requirements, but there was no purple. There was no documentation. So again, you get to decide how you're going to implement leadership and commitment. Some folks spell out, who is responsible for what, whether that be in a job description or that's spelled out in each procedure or that's spelled out in a manual. And then how do you ensure the responsibilities are met? So do you have a system that tracks what people are doing? It's all what makes sense for you. And then the last piece of this one, how do you show conformance during an audit? And those of you who are familiar with our program, when we go out and do environmental management system audits, we have that conversation with top management. We expect them to be available to us when we're doing the FE. And we ask them some of those questions related to those shall statements. How do you set up the responsibilities for this system at your facility? How do you go about allocating funds for the projects that you identify as something that needs to get completed for your energy management system? How do you communicate to the employees that this is important and it's something that they need to support? So those are some of the questions that we ask when we go out. Next slide, Angela. And then this slide, I've already talked about some of them, some of the ways you can show, but some of the other things, aligning that energy management system with your organization's business objectives and not being afraid to change that quickly if situation, changes. We already talked about applying the necessary resources, encouraging employees and interested parties, right? So I'm sure Angela and Don will talk about, you need to make sure that everyone, in your organization, whether that's employees, whether that's contractors, suppliers, anyone that comes on your site has the ability to provide you with feedback to make sure your energy performance is where you want it to be. And then especially, involving everyone in the energy decisions that affect them. So if it's someone that can affect energy just by, making sure lights are changed or turned off at the end of the day, or they shut their printers off or their computers off, just making sure that everyone knows that they can affect your system, and that it takes a tribe, not just a chief. I think that's it. Angela, next slide. All right,
Okay.
Angela, your section.
Yeah. So,
Don, I was going to say, Don, do we have any questions? I wasn't looking.
No questions at this time.
Okay.
okay. So quickly, just like all the other management systems, ISO 50001 also requires that you set an energy policy. So it requires top management to actually establish this policy. So you can see that we have another red spot here. So they shall establish a policy that is appropriate to the purpose of your organization, provides a framework for setting those objectives and energy targets. It includes a commitment to ensure the availability of information and necessary resources to achieve your objectives and energy targets. So that's one of the commitments that you have to meet. Again, just like the other ones, there are 3 commitments here. It's just that the commitments that you're making for your energy policy are a little bit different than your environmental or your quality policy. It also has to include a commitment to satisfy your applicable legal requirements and other requirements. That's pretty much the same as your other management systems, but this one is specifically related to your energy efficiency, energy use, energy consumption. And then you have to include a commitment to continual improvement, again, very similar. And this is your continual improvement of your energy performance and your energy management system. It supports the procurement of energy efficient products and services that impact energy performance, and it supports the design activities that consider energy performance and improvement. So some of the definitions here that might be helpful for you is top management. Marcia kind of talked about this a little bit, but it's the person or group of people who directs and controls your organization at the highest level, unless only a part of your organization is within your scope. Only then can you kind of bring it down to the more supervisory level. And in that case, it's the highest level of management over that area within your scope. Basically, this person is empowered to delegate authority and provide resources over anything within your scope. Some definitions according to, the Oxford Dictionary: commitment is a dedication to a cause or an activity, whereas support gives assistance to, especially financially, enable a function or an act. So that shows the difference between these commitments that are required versus these support elements that are a little bit lower down. Your energy policy shall be available as documented information. Sorry, I didn't get that one purpled, but so this one is required to be a document. It has to be communicated within your organization and available to your interested parties as appropriate. And then it also has to be periodically reviewed and updated as necessary. So just like your other policies, if you're going to try and do an integrated policy, it's fairly easy to pull all of those commitments and supporting issues together. All right, back to you, Marcia.
All righty. So the last part of Clause 5 is the organizational roles, responsibilities, and authorities. And so the standard says that top management shall ensure that the responsibilities and authorities for the relevant roles within your energy management system are assigned and communicated. And that top management shall assign specifically the responsibility and authority to the energy management team for ensuring that the management system is established, implemented, maintained, and continually improved. The management team shall also ensure that the management system conforms to the requirements of the ISO 50001 standard. The management team is responsible for implementing the action plans that you're going to develop under Section 6.2 and for continually improving the energy performance. That energy management team will also be responsible for reporting on the performance of the system and the improvement of your energy performance to top management at determined intervals. And we'll talk about that in management review. And then finally, the energy management team is required to establish the criteria and the methods needed to ensure that the operation and control of the energy management system are effective. So this one's, it's a little different with the energy management system in that they're setting up that team, and that team is the folks that are responsible for these specific roles. Next, Angela. So obviously it's going to be essential that that energy management team, or they're going to be essential to the success of the energy management system. So I just wanted to put on the slide, who should probably participate in that team. And for those of you who have a system, chime in. Type into that question box, if you have other folks. But so I was thinking, it's definitely going to be the top management, right? It's going to be your environmental staff. It could be your facilities management, the folks that are responsible for keeping up and, implementing, making sure the equipment is running. There's a procurement piece in this standard. So your procurement staff is probably going to be on your energy management team. And then I was thinking staff that would be related to your major power users in your facility, right? Because how they run that equipment could have a big effect on how successful you are. All right, did anybody type in any other folks that they think they're going to use for creating that energy management team?
Not yet.
All right. Angela, next. I think that's the end of section 5. All righty.
Yep. Why don't we take a 10-minute break?
Sounds good.
And then we'll come back and start on the planning section. So what we just finished up was that whole framework piece. Remember those 2 boxes that I talked about that were kind of outside the plan, do, check, act cycle. And when we come back, we'll start on planning and that plan cycle. And let me see if I can find my little timer. Well, and I will put up a timer, but we'll come back at, let's see, 10 minutes, about 2:20. All right. Hope everybody had a chance to stretch, grab something to drink, use the restroom, all that good stuff. All right. So we are going to go into the planning section. And this will be all that we do today, and then we'll hit all the other elements tomorrow. So to start with, just like in the environmental management system, the energy management system has you to look for your risks and opportunities. So when you're planning for your energy management system, you shall consider the issues referred to in your organization's context and the requirements referred to in your interested parties. And then you're going to review your activities, processes, activities and processes that can affect your energy performance. So anything that has an energy demand on your system, you need to consider when you're looking at your risks and opportunities. And when we're talking about energy, we're talking about more than just electricity. Remember, we're also talking about natural gas, oil, any other fuels, or even if you're using green energy, you have solar or wind. Just remember all of the energy that you are using counts when you're talking about defining energy in your system. Your planning shall be consistent with your policy, and it shall lead to actions that result in continual improvement in your energy performance. So again, if you've captured everything that uses energy and you're making improvements to your energy usage or your energy demand, then you shall have captured and met these shalls. Organizations shall determine your risks and opportunities that need to be addressed in order to give assurance that your energy management system can achieve its intended outcomes. Remember, the intended outcome is to reduce your energy usage, including energy performance improvement, prevent or reduce undesired effects, and to achieve continual improvement of your energy management system and the performance. So a risk and opportunity, Marcia mentioned this, is the potential effect of uncertainty or the deviation from what's expected. So a risk is something that poses a threat. An opportunity is something that has the potential for a positive effect. So she mentioned a few of these during context. For example, weather that is much hotter or colder than is expected. Severe weather such as hurricanes, tornadoes, thunderstorms, snowstorms, contracted design team that doesn't follow specs might be something that falls in this. A complicated data collection process that doesn't get you the data as quickly as you need it, or can get you false data because it's just too hard to get it correct. High turnover in your operational controls positions or your significant energy users. So if you have a lot of changeover in the people that are trying to operate the machinery or the energy demand devices, that can cause an issue because they're not the most up to speed, or maybe they don't know what information you need from them. Having poorly maintained equipment that decreases in efficiency over time can be a risk. Limited capital resources, I think we can all relate to that. And then long and difficult capital improvement processes as well. This happens for a lot of like governmental agencies, getting anything approved in any government agency takes forever. So you have to have those capital requests in years prior to actually wanting to make a change. So I think many of us on this call can relate. So the organization shall plan actions to address these risks and opportunities. So if you have defined it as a risk or an opportunity, then you have to figure out a way to address that. And then how you're going to address it. So in order to integrate and implement those actions into your energy management system and your performance process, and then also to evaluate the effectiveness of those actions. So if it's documented as a risk or an opportunity, then what can you do to mitigate that risk or take advantage of the opportunity? The standard requires actions to be planned. So you have to think about it ahead of time. All right, so that's your risks and opportunities. Now we're going to talk about goals. So the organization shall establish objectives at relevant functions and levels, and the organization shall establish energy targets. So you have to basically look at what you are doing and figure out how much you want to reduce your demand, right? So what is your goal going to be? And are you going to make it an overarching goal for your entire facility, or are you going to try and target that? So this allows you to have objectives at relevant functions and levels. So you could set a goal that specifically reduces energy on a certain building or within a certain process line or even on a specific piece of equipment. Or you could have an overall goal target for your energy reduction and then do a lot of projects underneath that. It's really up to you how you're going to set it. And objectives can also include improvements to the energy management system itself, or they can be specific to that performance goal. Your objectives and targets shall be consistent with your policy, of course, be measurable if practicable. You know, those of you who've heard me teach about environmental management systems have heard me stand on my soapbox about practicable before. The difference between practical and practicable is practicable means if at all possible versus practical is if it's convenient. So you need to be able to measure. And really 50,001 versus 14,001 is much more measurable because what you're looking at is specifically energy reductions. So in order to show progress towards energy reductions, you have to have numbers to do that. You need to take into account applicable requirements. Consider your SEU. So SEU is a significant energy user, and we will talk about those in a minute. You need to take into account opportunities to improve your energy performance. It's got to be monitored, so you have to be able to do those measurements and keep an eye on your progress. It needs to be communicated, so you need some way of letting the folks know that are working on the system as well as interested parties know, you know, where you stand, and then be updated as appropriate. Just like every other management system, this thing is live. You don't want to just, you know, write down a bunch of procedures and then put it up on a shelf and then ignore it and let it collect dust. You know, as things change, then you should make changes within your system too. And that includes your targets. And then the organization shall retain documented information on the objectives and energy targets. So you need to have written down what your energy targets are going to be. When you're planning how to achieve your objectives and targets, you have to establish and maintain action plans. So basically, anytime the management systems talk about action plans, that's the steps you're going to take in order to achieve those objectives that you've set. So what you're going to do, what resources you need, who's responsible, what date it's going to be completed. You really need that time-bound piece. You know, a lot of you have heard me talk about SMART goals. And then how the results are going to be evaluated, including the methods that you're going to use. And then the organization shall consider how those actions to achieve objectives and targets can be integrated into your organization's business processes, and you shall retain documented information on your action plans. So once you have your goal, then you need to establish the plan for achieving that goal. This is just a list of your planned actions and milestones, just like I said. You also need to document what resources are going to be needed, and that includes money, people, time, space requirements, any kind of resource that you might need in order to achieve that goal. You also need to establish who's responsible for the goal and maybe even individual steps along the way, as well as that time frame for completion. And then finally, you need to establish how you're going to track your progress. So if you're familiar with SMART goals, this is a good application of those. Remember that SMART stands for specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. So if you write your goals in the SMART goal format, then you've met most of the shalls in this section.
Angela, should you be on the next slide? Because it doesn't talk about goals on the one I'm looking at, 623.
That's right.
Okay.
Objectives and energy targets.
Yep.
Yeah, I didn't do a whole SMART goal slide.
Ah,
I'm just talking.
sorry.
No, you're good. As for integration, you might want to consider how other goals within your organization, so who within your organization is needed for achieving the goal. If you can get input from various departments and functions, that will improve your chances for making that improvement. If a project works in one area, you might want to implement it or something similar. In other areas, are energy projects included in your budget discussions? Are there energy requirements that you can include in your procurement process? We have a facility in the ESI that requires all large equipment that comes into the plant to be equipped with energy tracking devices to help manage the energy usage and have information needed to make various improvements. So you might think about doing something like that. Or if you're in more of an office atmosphere, requiring that any new equipment that is brought in, like copiers and that kind of thing, be Energy Star certified. You know, there are things that you can do in that procurement process that would help you. And, you know, that will go into the design piece a little bit later too. All right, so energy review is the next section of the standard. And all of these are kind of new from here to the end of section 6. So, you know, it doesn't really relate specifically to the environmental management system. It's very prescriptive. So this energy review is kind of a new concept for those of you that have EMSs and you're looking at ENMSs. So the organization shall develop and conduct an energy review. Develop the energy review that you have to analyze your energy usage and consumption based on measurement and other data. Identify your current types of energy and evaluate past and current energy use and consumption. And then it's got to be based on based on that analysis, then you identify your SEUs. So the SEUs are your significant energy users. So for those of you from the environmental world, you can think of that as your significant aspects for energy. So these are the things, your big users, right? These are the things that you are most concerned about reducing their impact, because reducing the impact of your biggest user will probably reduce your overall impact faster. And then for each significant energy user, you want to determine what the relevant variables are for that equipment. You want to determine current energy performance, identify the persons working under your control and influence that affect that piece of equipment or that building, or however you're going to break down your SEUs. And then you need to determine and prioritize opportunities for improving energy performance and estimate future energy use and energy consumption. So first, you want to think about what types of energy do you have? Is it electricity, natural gas, fuel oil, propane, wood, coal, whatever it is that you're using that provides you with energy, not just electricity, but all of those potential energy sources. Maybe you have hydro, I don't know. So what devices use it? You know, do you have chillers, boilers, fans, pumps, lighting, compressors, office machinery, any other machines that are within your facility? Boilers, particularly, you know, when we're talking about those other fuels. And then once you know what you have, then you want to determine how much you use. So you can look at past utility bills for your electricity. You might have meters for some of the other materials. If you do have meters on specific buildings or pieces of equipment, then that will help narrow your focus, right? And then you can look at trends over time and note where there are spikes or dips and try to determine why those occurred. You know, was it a weather event, or was it a maintenance issue with that piece of equipment, or who knows? But you want to analyze that data and see if you can figure out what happened. And you might want to consider normalizing that data to production or work hours. Remember, you know, it's a little scary to think about a prescriptive standard that is requiring you to continually improve and that you're being judged on your performance. So one way to level that out is to use normalization. So that way, as you continue to expand or grow, you can basically equalize that data, right, to the production you're going through. So for example, it would be kilowatt hours would be your general usage, but if you normalize that to the number of widgets you made, then while your usage overall might be going up, your usage per widget might be staying the same or going down. So those normalization will really help you in this standard. And then you want to determine your significant energy users. In order to do that, you may want to put them in order by how much energy is used, and then decide which of those are the largest users. So you may want to install energy tracking devices in order to help you determine specific equipment that has a higher energy demand. And then SEUs can be facilities, they can be systems, they can be processes, or they can be specific pieces of equipment. So however you can evaluate the data that you have or increase the amount of data that you have, any of that will work. Probably in most beginners cases, what you're talking about is, high level, you have, energy data as a building, for example. The more you look for opportunities, the more likely it is that you'll start looking for ways to kind of shrink that footprint and start looking at specific devices if you can find ways to sub-meter those or estimate it through, your purchasing requirements and that kind of thing. And then for each significant energy user, you'll need to figure out what changes can affect that energy usage. For example, heating degree days and cooling degree days, or average outside temperatures, humidity, working hours, all of that kind of stuff can affect your HVAC systems. Perhaps occupancy, production, output, et cetera, those kinds of things. You may have specific settings that could be reduced in order to reduce the output from, for example, a compressor. You can reduce the pressure and therefore it's not running as often. So think about all the different things that you can do on each piece of equipment that you're looking at. And then from those, determine what can be measured. Is the current performance and who has any control over that device, including any contractors. You want to figure out what kind of improvements can be made to those significant energy users, and then decide which ones will be worked on and in what order, since you probably don't have resources to do everything at once, right? None of us have enough hours in the day to do everything we'd love to do, right? You may request an energy audit from an outside source, like our waste reduction partners I mentioned at the beginning. NCSU and other universities, UNC Charlotte recently received a grant for this kind of thing. Are other sources for outside energy audits. You should also bring the folks in that work with energy using equipment and brainstorm energy saving possibilities. Remember that energy team that Marcia talked about. Bring them all in and figure out what can be done. And then, estimate a goal and figure out what you can do, right? So continuing on with the energy review. So your energy review shall be updated at defined intervals. You figure out what a defined interval is to you, whether that's annually or every 6 months or whatever it takes for you to make sure that you're making improvements, as well as in response to major changes at your facility, equipment, systems, or energy using processes. And then the organization shall maintain as documented information the methods and criteria used to develop your energy review. So remember, this is how you're ranking things. So how are you going to be able to replicate that process and make sure that everything could be done by somebody else if you were to leave? You win the lottery and move on, someone else has to come in and behind you. Will they be able to follow along and get at least close to the same results as you did? And then you shall retain documented information of your results. So the energy review has to be updated at specific intervals when major changes to your site, equipment, or systems. So it really makes sense. It's just like your aspects and impacts for those of you with environmental management systems. If something big happens or something's about to happen, then you need to review to make sure that your energy users are still the appropriate ones for you to be looking at. That specific interval for updating is defined by you. It's not defined by anybody else because it says, it doesn't say it's going to be updated annually. It says it's going to be updated at defined intervals. So you get to decide what that interval is. And then the interval chosen can be for the energy review as a whole, or as defined for individual components of the energy review, or defined as an interval specific only to updating your energy opportunities and not other parts of your system. So really it's up to you what this defined interval means. All right, moving on to performance indicators. And this is also, again, specific to energy. So the organization shall determine what your ENPIs are. So the standard actually specifically says ENPI a lot. So what that is your energy performance indicators. It is a measure or unit of energy performance as defined by your organization. So that can be kilowatt hours per square foot for a building. It could be your total BTUs per pound of steam for a large central boiler. It can be your total kilowatt hours per ton for a chiller. It's really whatever you decide that performance indicator is going to be. But ENPIs can be a simple metric, a ratio, it can be a model, or something else, you know, as long as it is energy related and it helps you to show where you are currently and then where you are moving to, right? Your ENPIs are tracked, recorded, and trended over time. So you need a way to have a numerical value. So organizations shall determine what those ENPIs are that are appropriate for measuring and monitoring your performance, and then enable the organization to demonstrate energy performance improvement. The method for determining and updating your ENPIs shall be maintained as documented information. So for whatever you choose as your ENPI, you need to be able to document how you got to that and how you're going to keep it up to date, right? So that's this whole method for determining and updating your energy performance indicators. And then where the organization has data indicating that relevant variables significantly affect your energy performance, the organization shall consider such data to establish the appropriate ENPIs. And then your ENPI shall be reviewed and compared to their respective ENBs. There's another abbreviation they use a lot. That's your baseline as appropriate. And then that shall be documented and your ENPI values shall be documented and maintained. So how are you going to select your appropriate ENPIs? You know, what do you already measure and use that's in the energy field? What's going to help you determine your overall energy performance? Who currently collects and monitors this information? And then who's going to approve the selection of your ENPIs? You need to consider all of those things. Your methodology for determining and updating their ENPIs must be documented, and this means you have to be able to show it to an auditor. So think about that when you're documenting. It's all about showing that evidence to an auditor, right? It's also to help you be able to replicate it, as I mentioned before. And you have to compare your performance indicators to the established baselines for these indicators. Okay, so it's saying that you have to compare it to baselines, but it hasn't talked about baselines. So let's talk about baselines. It's weird that they make you talk about, you know, improving before they have you talk about what you're comparing it to, but they do. So now we're going to talk about baselines. So the organization shall establish an ENB, so your energy baseline, using information from your energy review and taking into account a suitable period of time. It's another very general kind of time thing, isn't it? Just a suitable period of time. And then where the organization has data indicating that relevant variables significantly affect energy performance, then the organization shall carry out normalization of the ENPI value and corresponding ENBs. So this piece of the standard actually tells you you have to normalize, whereas before I said it might be a good idea. Now, when we're talking about baselines, it's talking about you shall normalize. So yes, you have to establish baselines too for each of the performance indicators that you will be tracking. You must have baseline data so that you have a comparison in order to show your progress. You can't show that you've moved forward if you can't show where you're coming from. Now, normalization. For energy usage that's affected by something specific, the standard requires normalization to that variable. For example, if production rates significantly impact the amount of energy used, then you have to calculate the usage compared to that variable. Production, weather, employee work hours, all of those kinds of things can affect, and they can all be used for your normalization. This comparison can help show progress even when actual usage is increasing. So we talked about normalization a couple of times. It's sometimes a little difficult concept to get. So if any of you have questions, let me know, because we talk about normalization with environmental goals as well. All right. Continuing on with energy baseline, it shall be revised in the case of one or more of the following. So if your energy performance indicators no longer reflect your organization's energy performance, if you've had major changes to the static factors, and then according to a predetermined method. So any one of those things or a combination of those things can cause you to have to reset your energy baseline. We've all had things happen where maybe you've added a line, or maybe you've shut down part of your building, or maybe you've had a change in production, and so the baseline that you set, for whether that's for an energy goal or for any other goal, doesn't really make sense anymore. So maybe you've had a new meter installed. Any of those kinds of things could be a trigger for you to reset your baseline. So the standard gives you a means to do that and actually requires that you do that when it's necessary. Then the organization shall retain documented information of your energy baselines, relevant variable data, and modifications to your baselines. So, when you set those baselines, make sure that you have a running record of what those are, and if changes are made, why you made those changes. All right. Planning for the collection of energy data. So basically, this is asking, what are you going to measure? How are you going to measure it? How often are you going to measure it? Who's responsible? How is the data recorded? How and when is the data going to be measured? And then how is it going to be compared to the baseline or more recent measurements in order to demonstrate progress? And then how is that data maintained and backed up? So the standard specifically says the organization shall ensure that key characteristics of its operations affecting energy performance are identified, measured, monitored, and analyzed at planned intervals. So it's not telling you how often. You need to figure that out. It's not even telling you what those key characteristics are, but remember, you just defined your performance indicator. So I would assume that those are going to be your key characteristics in most cases. The organization shall define and implement an energy data collection plan appropriate to your size, complexity, resources, and measurement and monitoring equipment. So this is saying, sure, some facilities have a lot more capital that they can invest in order to sub-meter everything, but not everybody has those resources. And so maybe you do only have your electricity bills and your fuel bills that you can use as your monitoring device. And that's okay, as long as it is appropriate for your facility. And then the plan shall specify the data necessary to monitor the key characteristics and state how and at what frequency the data shall be collected and retained. Right. So continuing on with planning for data collection, then the data to be collected or acquired by measurement as applicable and retained documented information shall include. So you have to keep all of these things as a record. Interestingly, it says data to be collected, but then it doesn't say documented information in this particular section, although I think it does say it later. But you have to include the relevant variables for your significant energy users, your energy consumption related to those significant energy users and to the organization, operational criteria related to your significant energy users, static factors if applicable. So static factors are things like things that don't routinely change but affects your energy performance significantly. For example, your facility size or your product mix or your employee hours or shifts. You know, some facilities have lights on all the time, some facilities don't. So things that can change rarely, but don't necessarily change all the time, those kinds of things are considered static factors. The size of your facility, the building footprint, is a huge one when we're talking about static factors. All right, data specified in action plans. All of those things have to be considered when you're looking at your data to be collected. And then the energy data collection plan shall be reviewed at defined intervals and updated as appropriate. So you need to figure out how often you're going to look at that data. Energy data collection plan shall be reviewed at defined intervals and updated as appropriate. Organizations shall ensure that the equipment used for measurement of key characteristics provides data which is accurate and repeatable. So think about, are you going to need to calibrate any devices that you use? Make sure that the data is appropriate for what you're trying to achieve. And then the organization shall retain documented information on measurement, monitoring, and other means of establishing accuracy and repeatability. So there's a lot of data here, and this is the end of 6.6, and you'll see it didn't say anything about documented information, but you have a bunch of records here in order to demonstrate that you've met each one of these shalls. So even though it doesn't say you have documented information, I would consider each one of these records that it's requiring of you documented information. Okay, so that's the end of planning. Tomorrow we'll start with support and operation, but that's a lot for today. We're actually ending about an hour early, but is there any questions at all on anything we've gone over today?
Nothing's shown up yet.
All right, so you're going to know because I've sat through enough classes before, Angela, and I know at least one of our audience is going to appreciate this question. Can you tell us the difference between objectives and targets?
So, okay, so for me, objectives are broader and targets are more specific. So your objective might be to reduce energy, but the target would be by 3% or by 5%, or, you know, that very specific piece. Or you could have an objective that is to reduce energy usage for your facility by 5%, and then you would have a target of reducing the energy you demand from this boiler specifically. So it's basically a more concise, a more targeted, for lack of a better word, piece to your overall objective. At least that's the way I think about it.
All right, and I have another question. I've sat through our other training long enough. So one of the things in an environmental management system is when you identify risks and opportunities, you get to choose which ones you address. But when I was listening to you, it sounded like in the energy management system, there is no choice.
Well, if you define it as a risk or an opportunity, just like in the environmental management system, if you've defined it as a risk or an opportunity, then you have to address it. It does not use that same language where it says if, let's see, I can't remember the exact wording, but it's something like those things that you have defined as needing to be addressed.
Risk.
The language in the energy standard is not the same. So yes, is the answer to your question, that language is not there. It seems to say if it's a risk or an opportunity, you need to address it. And it makes sense because this is a much more performance-based standard than the environmental standard is. It's specifically looking for ways that you can reduce your energy numbers. So if you have a risk there, then yes, you probably should be documenting it and addressing it. So
All
it's
right.
again, it's that objective versus target. You know, a lot of folks have incorporated energy into their environmental management systems for years. So it's really just kind of a subset that is performance-based instead of systemic-based, although it does both.
And then the last thing I just wanted to add is not so much a question, but I was thinking as you were talking about, doing those energy reviews, and you noted, we've got some outside resources that we can point to. I would just encourage the folks that are listening today that are ESI members. You could always see if there was another ESI member that was interested. And you can do an exchange where you go to each other's sites and do a set of eyes that way as an energy review, and we can always help facilitate that.
Yeah, absolutely. We love doing that networking piece where we can get folks into each other's facilities to help each other. All right, Dawn, any questions come up while we were chatting?
No.
All righty. Well, we're going to give you back an hour of your day. We will talk about the rest of the standard tomorrow afternoon, same bat time, same bat channel. It is really the same link, and we will go through the rest of the standard then.
And I was going to say, we'll probably change out that PDF of the handouts, because I know there was a purple you needed to do, and I had made some changes. So if you had downloaded today's, I would say hang on and download it again tomorrow, because it'll be a little bit different.
Yeah, not a lot, just a little updates.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you all. We'll talk to you tomorrow.
Thank you all.